Mhm.
Counselor Maestri.
With the ordinance coming up next week for the police, I'm a little concerned about the wording and the quartermaster work that I know they put out an RFI, and the local uniform shop called me and said that they don't have the technology to basically apply for that RFI that they're requesting in the RFI for the uniform pricing. And I want to know why. And I think counselors should be concerned about it, because if you're going to, previously, has the money not come out of, just been given to them in their check, the previous amount of uniform allowance?
So the chief's going to be here when that's reviewed, and you can ask him those questions. I wouldn't know the details of that.
Okay,
Sorry.
so these are the things that I'm looking for. Okay, if they were previously given money, their uniform allowance and their paycheck, why can't we just continue to give them the new amount in their paycheck, and then they choose who they go to, rather than this ordinance says that it's going to go to the preferred vendor, which the local uniform shop, because of their technology, doesn't meet that requirement. They can't meet the requirements of the RFI. And if it's worked before, why can't the increase in the money just go into their paycheck, and then they choose if they want to go and get good pricing online, or if they want to continue with the local vendor. The local vendor's been serving our community and serving our officers for many years. It's a huge hit to them financially if we go with an out of town vendor. And so I just would like counsel, because if we're going to set that precedence, that could happen to any one of the businesses that we do business with as the city. They can all be put up for that same loss of revenue and loss of business and affecting their business poorly. So maybe as council, we need to consider that be removed, and that they get their check, they get the money, and they do what they need to do with it in order to provide themselves with the uniforms. If it's worked for them at $400 all these years, it's going to work for them at $800 all these years for the officers to make that decision on how they're going to purchase their uniforms. And so I just would like for us to consider that, give it thought, because it is, if we're about small businesses and keeping the small businesses going in this community, we need to give that strong consideration before we approve that ordinance as written.
So we'll have the chief here and he can answer those questions, but let you know, you can't really pick and choose on the ordinance. What's being presented is a contract amendment negotiated with the union. So if it's not acceptable, you have to go back with the amendment to the union before you present it again.
Yeah, well, it's too bad, because I asked the chief on the last time and he said he didn't care that the small business he didn't care about that. What he cared about was uniform pricing, but we're all adults here. And if we want to go and get bargain price, we can bargain price as individuals and not as a contractual whole to the, because we have a uniform shop that has served this law enforcement community for many, many years. And if we do this with one small business, that leaves us open to do it with any of the small businesses that work with the city. Obviously, we don't want conflicts of interest and so forth, but we also don't want to affect small businesses in this community. So if we have to go back to for an amendment, however that reads, but I think council needs to give it strong consideration.
Sure.
And that's all I'm asking. Thank you.
Counselor Graham.
Counselor Maestri, do you know who the uniform shop is now and how much they do annually with the PD?
Yeah, it's the one over there, MB on Prairie Avenue. They've done it for years. They've been the uniform shop.
MBS?
Yes.
And how much do they do annually with the PD?
I didn't ask how much they did
Because
annually,
you
but
said
if
that they were going to suffer a significant
well,
loss. I was just
well,
wondering what
okay,
that was.
just take the $800 times how many officers
It's
we have.
600 a year.
Oh,
And they can, it's not just on uniforms. They can buy like wheels for their car. I think they can buy all kinds of stuff.
they could.
I was just wondering if you had exact figures.
I didn't have him, but when you take,
Do you have a contact? for
when,
the-
yes, I
who
do.
is it?
It's Mike who owns it. So you can just call down
Isn't
there.
that Betty Cash?
No, that's the other
Is
one.
Betty Cash
Because
own
it's
that?
two, it's two. It's also embroidery plus.
Oh, so there's two different ones?
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah.
Do we have a copy of the?
If
the
that
ordinance?
money, if that money is to that preferred vendor, that's how much money goes outside of our city to someone else. So is if it's $600, no, it's 800 in the ordinance.
6. That's how much they get now.
Oh, okay, well, $200 more, but now they're not gonna get that, any of that 6, because 800 goes to that vendor. And they work out of a little account as they purchase. So it's 800 times how many officers we have goes out of this
And
community.
these two shops that you talked to, they would be able to supply a quartermaster system for 231 officers.
They've been doing it. They've been,
To
do you
that
have to have a
amount.
system? Does it
To-
have to have a system?
Yeah.
Or do you
because
get
I think-
an allowance?
I think it's Chief Martin, do you know any?
Yeah, that, the way it's set up is there's going to be a system and the vendor will keep track of, each officer will get a card basically issued by the vendor that will allow them to purchase a certain dollar amount worth of uniforms from the vendor.
Okay.
So I don't know why anybody can't set that kind of system up.
Sure.
If they wanted
I
to.
think that's something that we stepped out already. We put the verbiage in this ordinance. And if they're not, we need to talk to them about it. See, I asked you guys, I told you guys that this was a situation way back when we talked about it.
Right, right.
And that there was a problem. We have a small business in town, actually two, that this is going to affect. And you said, oh, well, they'll have the time, they'll have the right to answer to the RFI.
Right.
Okay, but if they can't meet the requirements of the RFI because their technology doesn't support that,
Well, they need to improve their technology, obviously, so they do. Why can't they do that?
because if you've been giving the officers money prior to, what is wrong with changing it? Why do we have to change how we distribute it to the officers?
Well,
Is it all about technology and moving forward and change and so forth?
part of it is we want to make sure the money's used for uniforms.
So it hasn't been in the past?
Well, I don't know
That's what-
whether it has or not.
If it's not a broken
Sounds like it's a
system,
vote.
I don't know whether it has or not,
yeah,
but this is the
Well,
system
well,
that the
this- well,
police
this is what
department
I'm
came up
saying.
with and purchasing came up with.
all for a $200 increase. All for a $200 increase when $600 has been distributed to the officers all these years for a $200 increase. Now we're contracting with a preferred vendor, which is not local.
It could be. It could be any preferred vendor that can meet those requirements. That's why we opened it up for an RF.
Well, I was called just a few minutes before this meeting. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at your RFI because some small businesses, it's not going to make a difference. They're still spending the money the same way. It's just $200 more a month as they have been in the past. Why we have to track whether the officers are using that money correctly is beyond me. They need to show up. It's required that they have their uniforms and they have their equipment, period.
I think it might be helpful to have the chief reach out to you in advance of the meeting. Because I don't think some of the things you're indicating are probably accurate or.
Well, that's
direction.
why I asked for a discussion. He said, and the last time I asked him about it, he didn't care about the small business. What he cared about was a better deal for his officers. Well, they're adults. They can get those better deals. Anybody could shop with their own money the way they want.
Yep.
And that's what I'm saying. Why would we affect a small business over that?
Deputy Chief Martin, do you want to come and answer any of these or should we? Great, come on down.
In the meantime, do we have a copy of this ordinance? I mean,
We don't.
obviously you have a copy, but I haven't seen an ordinance yet.
What was on the first
It was
read?
on first reading last
What's
week,
it?
yeah.
Well, we're talking,
So we're
I
gonna
can
go
pull it
back.
off and send it
but
to
that
you.
doesn't deal with the process itself, does it? It just, it's a
states in-
contract between the union and the city.
Right, so the contract amendment does a number of things. The quartermaster was the minor part. But it does implement a quartermaster system, which is different from how they've done it in the past. Now, we will be providing the uniforms. And so there's going to be control there, and there's going to be a need to bid that out for the best interest of the city. That's what the
But the ordinance doesn't have included within it a process on how that quartermaster contract is going to look like.
It's going to be the one that the city bids out.
It's probably in the
Right.
RFI would be.
Okay.
But in any event, the specifics of why and the benefits, that would come from PD.
So I can kind of give you a history and the background on our uniform process. So I was hired in 2002. And that point, when I got hired, I was given a radio and a badge.
Mhm.
Everything else was, I had to purchase myself. In that process, that money for uniform allowance has been raised to $450 a year, which the officers get in January with their check in order to purchase uniforms for the upcoming year. Part of the thing that we've looked at over the history of this last year with our recruiting issues and what we're trying to do is we've looked at other departments across the state that have provided a better service when hiring officers. And most other departments that we've looked at have a quartermaster system, have a system where the officers go in and they're able to purchase their uniforms in the beginning from that quartermaster system and they get outfitted totally. So with this quartermaster system, we're going to provide everything to the officers from boots to belts, so they will not have to purchase anything. So that's the biggest thing for the quartermaster system.
Okay.
And in the process with the RFI, how it goes out, we want to make it as easy as possible for the officers to get the equipment that they need. The way it looks now, when we hire an officer in the academy with this system, they will come in, we will measure them. They will have all their measurements put into the system and they will have a package given to them in the beginning of the academy that will outfit them for their academy uniforms. And then when they graduate, it'll outfit them for their complete patrol uniforms when they go out on patrol. So that's the process that we're looking at for the system. The RFI, we'll have to have that put out, and individual companies that can meet that requirement will be, looked at, and we'll choose the best one possible through the city. And that's kind of why we're going with that. It's not only to give the officers the ability to get the uniforms that they need, but it's also to help our recruiting status with other agencies in the Front Range in Colorado. We have 3 uniforms that are approved for wear. We have Blower, we have 511, and we have First Tactical. So those are the officers that are uniforms that are approved for wear through our policy. And officers have a certain type of uniform they like. I'm a 511 guy. I like the way the uniforms fit. I like how they react to the stressors of the job. So that has to be a part of the process as well, to make sure that they can purchase the uniforms that they wear on a consistent basis.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the process behind the quartermaster system, and what we're trying to do.
And I completely understand that. What I want to make sure is that we don't just go ahead and sign and agree to this ordinance. And I have a small business owner out there that has his side of the story as to why he's lost business over this. I am answering to a constituent that has called me about how it's affecting his business. And it needs to be a public discussion as to why that is doing, rather than just putting an ordinance in front of us and signing it. And then away goes any small business owner in this town's business. It affects them anyway in a negative manner. And that's all I'm asking. I'm following through with what our constituents have asked of us, and putting it in front of council, and so that we can make a decision on what's best.
And
And that's all I'm trying to do.
I understand that, ma'am.
Mhm.
I do understand
I didn't appreciate, I don't care about his business response and the last response that was given to me on public record. I want, if you don't maybe like the uniform shop that we have here, we need to know these things, because it's going to reflect upon this council. I don't want to be knowing that our decisions are affecting small businesses here in this town. And
Well,
that's,
All I can speak to is the reason behind the quartermaster system and why we've come up with it.
Mhm.
And I fully believe in the RFI process because I've been through it several times with other technology and things that we've gone forward with. So we have to go through with the process.
Yeah, so it can, like I said, at this point, it can affect any department, anything that we do with any department here in Pueblo. And give the small businesses heads up for it because we do a lot of business with small businesses here in this town. Thank you.
I wanted to make one comment, and that is the local businesses that are affected by this have a huge opportunity here now, because now we're going to be expending a lot more money. And, you know, we live in a free enterprise system where everybody, I've been in business, we have several business people. The competition, okay, is something that is important in our system. But in this particular case, I hope you would tell your constituent that presents him with a huge opportunity
To
to
compete,
compete.
with a large nationwide company.
Well,
Because
we're
that's
speculating. as
no,
to-
we're not, because I know that the city had gone to a large company and got preliminary numbers in order to create their system. So it's an online company.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Well,
We will
we're not
have this
speculating.
conversation at the second reading on Monday. Are there any other final questions now that Deputy Chief has come to this? Councilman Atencio?
I don't know if it's for the chief or not, but I got a phone call from a police officer friend of mine who had one of his police officer friends talk to him. This police officer friend of my police officer friend says, when I get my bonus, I'm out of here. So a month later, 2 months later, our police officers take their bonuses. There's $10,000 bonuses and hit the road. Are there any guarantees that we're going to retain any police officers with this $10,000? None?
So there's none. And we have a statute that we have to deal with that protects the employee's right to freely leave for another job, and we'll review that and on the presentation second. So, I mean, this is a work session for certain items. I mean, and I can review that at that time, but I don't have it in.
Yeah, well, I mean, it should be a concern, don't you think, if we're trying to retain people and there's, even if it's one person that wants to collect their $10,000 and hit the road.
Counselor, I argued that we ought to make them pay it back. Legal counsel says we can't do that legally. You know, that if you don't agree to stay for a certain period of time, you have to refund some of that money you got, but
Makes sense to me.
it's not legally possible apparently to set it up in that fashion. So the agreement that we reached with the police union was that it would be paid in a lump sum in their July paycheck.
I mean, I'm not against the bonus. I'm just concerned that there are people, you know, not every
Yeah, there-
police officer out there is a Boy
Yeah.
Scout and they're going to stay and continue their commitment to the city.
And I don't think hopefully those will be far and few between, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility. I
So,
mean, obviously, the reason we're paying it is as a retention bonus to try to keep them to maintain their employment here, but there's no guarantee that any or all of them will do that.
okay.
Well, the other in pertaining to that, Larry, how many are eligible for retirement this year? You know, that's another question in mind. So those are the things that, you know, because we had a little discussion and then we never really had a full discussion. All we see is the ordinance, and then we still don't have a discussion until we're ready to approve it. And I think there's still a lot of questions on the table. And that's the concern. So with that being said,
Counselor Winter, and then we have to move on.
Yeah, I get it. I would have to agree with that, Regina, because I think a lot of things are rushed and, you know, called to the question and things like that without proper discussion. But, you know, we went through a similar thing in 2016 and 2017 with the LES and kind of went back and forth with morale and salary. And when it came down to it, it was a smaller percentage. And I think that the officers that answered the questionnaire was like 30% of the officers?
I don't remember
Okay.
how many answered it.
Well, we had a similar situation going on in 2016 and 2017 over Velez, and they said it was either money or it was morale, and it just went back and forth. And I had phone calls every day about morale from Velez. And when it came right down to it, they would not vote on, they didn't have enough votes for a vote of no confidence. So I think before we start, because Nick had mentioned that we'll wait and see if money is the issue. Well, why don't we see if morale is actually the issue and see if they'll vote for a no confidence vote? If they give us a no confidence vote, then we can move forward with in another direction. You're not understanding what I'm saying?
No confidence vote on the chief?
Right.
I don't think there's that kind of issue in the police
Well,
department.
they indicated that was number 2 was morale.
Well, morale, but not necessarily no
I'm
confidence.
just saying, you
I
know,
think.
number one
Administrative issues.
a number one issue for anyone to leave their job, of course, consideration for leaving the job for anyone is going to be money. Even if you have great morale, you know, will you consider leaving your job? Well, sure, for more money. So for me, number 1 is not worth anything until you address number 2. So I think it's throwing a lot of money when maybe number 2 is the problem. Maybe we need to see where that goes
Well,
before we throw money at it.
Well, we
I'm
obviously-
just saying, it's, you know, we're brainstorming. So I'm not asking you to take sides. I'm asking for a brainstorm
Not
here.
brainstorming at this point. I mean, at this point, we've reached an agreement with the union based upon direction we got from council after the police union came and presented and said, hey, these are the results of our survey. This is what's going on in the department. We've been in touch with them. We've been in touch with other experts. I'm not certain in my own mind that money's the issue. I mean, but and the problem where we're having retention is not with the older officers. It's with those officers that have less than 10 years of experience. So what you're going to see next week is an adjustment to the pay scale for those officers that basically results since January 1 in a 28% increase in the starting pay for a patrol officer in the city of Pueblo. So we're going to see whether or not money is part of the reason. You know, money's probably part of the reason, but part of the reason is what's going on in this country and what's gone on in this country in the last 3 years. Nobody wants to be a police officer because citizens don't respect them. The community doesn't respect them. I think it's different here, but when you're looking at
Mhm.
trying to attract people here, they don't pick up on that.
Have to move
Oh,
on. We
No,
ha-
no,
there's
no, no.
a-
This is why we end up not having decisions because we move on. I mean, seriously, this is why things come back all the time and we just call it off too
we
soon.
do have an agenda. We
Okay,
have
okay,
friends
okay.
here.
But I just want to point
Colorado
out that
Springs.
when HR gave that big presentation, it was like 1% or one person left because of issues with the new laws and how policemen are treated. One person,
Right.
that was it. So
That's the reason they
that's not
left, but
that's not a
that's-
legitimate, that wasn't a legitimate deal.
Well, but that's part of the reason why that's why people leave. But in terms of attracting new people who want to be police officers,
You're talking about retention.
well, we're talking
That's the
about
whole thing is
recruitment and
retention.
retention. We're talking about
Right.
both.
Right, right.
We're talking about both.
Mhm.
So when we make these agreements to put money in place, we're under contract. And then say, like you just said, well, we're trying this first. But we're contractually obligated to pay them this pay increase for a number of years. What Larry says, if what's told to him is true, I'm going to take my money and I'm out of here. That's reinforcing that 40, almost 40%, 2 different issues, morale and administration, are a serious factor in this. And we're not here trying to say, oh, we don't want to give officers money. What we're here is we're trying to resolve the issue. You had said, and the accountant director, our finance director came and said that if we agree to this increase, it's going to drain the general fund by 2027.
No, a 10% across the board increase right now. That's what they said would drain the general
Okay.
fund.
Well, and then the other
That's
thing.
not what we've done.
Okay, so what we haven't really talked about the terms in detail, number one, just before a vote is not the time to talk about the final terms. We brought ideas forward. The union brought ideas forward. And you guys went into negotiations, which you should have but you should still have a better presentation and a longer time for council to consider this.
All you need, you've had 2 weeks so far.
And with no discussion until we brought it up right now. And then
the most we talked about it, actually.
We've talked about this several times and it's been all on the table for months. It's ridiculous that the two of you are acting like this.
no,
is
what's ridiculous
a
is
new thing.
it,
Okay,
what's
wait.
ridiculous. You're ridiculous.
Councilor
Um,
Maestri,
No,
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 This-
she just called us ridiculous,
We-
Sarah. Don't start.
then, but okay, so this is.
So
this-
what I want
we
to,
have
what I'm
friends
trying to
here,
ask there,
And this is not on the agenda, Councilor Maestri.
it,
We have talked a lot about this.
okay,
on work
so
sessions.
how we're gonna run, no, we have not talked about the final details.
Then
We
we will
talked
talk
about,
about it at the next meeting.
but then we're supposed to vote. So when are those amendments supposed to be made? If there is an amendment to it, that means we got to turn around and send it all back to be amended. And so I'm gonna stand firm on this. We need to have, you think it's funny? Oh, okay.
I'm glad you're standing firm. on something.
So I'm standing firm on this. We
It's
need
okay.
to have a discussion because here's the other thing. We're talking about the police right now, but fire's right behind it. We know that. We know fire's behind it. We know the general workers union is behind it. We're looking at passing out ARPA funds that could be used to cover these things with our infrastructure and passing out ARPA funds that have nothing to do with our infrastructure. And so we're spending money before we're not spending it from the ARPA funds. We're having to take it from the general fund. Everything that comes in front of us right now is probably because we don't have the ARPA funds to cover all of these retention bonuses.
We do have the
Yeah.
ARPA funds to cover the retention bonuses.
You have,
Yes.
but we don't for the salaries for this year.
Salaries, we don't, but
Exactly.
and I don't remember the numbers now, but we're talking about less than $500,000 in increased salaries
For
between
the
now and
police
the end of the year for the
department.
police department.
For the police
Right,
department.
right.
But we have other unions that are following the police department.
Well, we have a collective bargaining agreement with the general service employees that has been extended. Next year, they're going to get a 5.3% increase. We are in the process of negotiating a contract with the fire department now. Initial proposals haven't been exchanged, but neither of those bargaining units are in the same position as the police department, in my judgment, right now.
Mhm. But
So
they're coming to the table, right? They're coming in front of us. Is that correct?
are they coming what?
They're coming in front of us, right? Because
The fire department will, yes. General service is already done. They're done.
when did we approve their, is that?
Couple of
when's
months
their-
ago, we approved the
No,
extension of their
when's-
contract.
When's their pay from the COVID? When is that? We haven't finished that. We didn't approve that. Remember, they didn't want $1,000 apiece. They wanted so much per hour. They were supposed to come back
Yeah, but
here
they
this
have-
month.
We have ARPA money allocated there. There's been,
Yeah, but the ARPA money that we allocated originally was $1,000 per employee.
Miss Lana,
Now, there's a
Miss
new
Lana.
amount.
Yeah, the update on the general services, COVID, essential pay. They had a meeting here. They have the meeting next week. And what the mayor discussed with the bargaining unit president is that she wanted to have a vote among the individuals, as some of them were going to receive less than $1,000 with the new calculation. So she asked for a vote among her membership. And after that vote takes place next week, she will be back with what that vote resulted in. So we can share that with you and the dollar amounts before the resolution is back on the agenda, which we anticipated to be the 10th of July.
But that can be an increase, correct?
As calculated with the new $1.50 per hour.
Everything was allocated towards an original amount. Was allocated towards $1,000, but this new amount is an increase. And we
And-
only have about 1.5 million after allocations.
Yes, and the.
It won't be that much.
the-
It wasn't 1 point. It's
No, no,
about 3 times as
I didn't
much.
say that. I said we have, after allocations, the original allocation of the $1,000 per person of all the ARPA monies, we have 1.5 million left.
You are correct from
Okay.
last month's report. However, as a result of council's direction to increase from the $1,000 per employee to the $1.50 per hour worked during that COVID period, we made an adjustment in the ARPA funds before the end of last month that we will see how you finalize it, but not until July. And the increase would have gone from the 237 to, I recall, something like, his estimate of 430. It about doubles. And then depending on where the union membership goes, we'll be back to share that with all of you, as some of their membership will be affected and have less than $1,000 as a result of the different calculation.
All righty.
Okay, we have to move on. We have spent enough time on this, and just briefly looking back, we've had 3 separate work sessions about the police department pay. The twice where the police union has been here, and extra time when Chief Miller talked about it. So that's 3 separate work sessions over the course of 3 weeks, and then multiple weeks beyond that in the middle. So we're moving on. I encourage you, if you want to have more details and information about it, perhaps get with Mr. Jagger as he's writing that for the next regular meeting. Deputy Martin, I appreciate you coming up here. You may return to your seat. I want to extend my deepest heartfelt thank you to our friends from the Fountain Creek Watershed Project and the Pikes Peak Waterways for your patience tonight. So come on up. We're going to spend the next 30 minutes talking about the Colorado Springs Creek Plan. So we have guests Annie, Chris, Tim, and Jan. So you would want to press your mic. There you go.
Oh, I got the red bar.
Thank you.
I just want to thank you for having us here tonight. My name is Jan Martin. I happen to be a former city council member from Colorado Springs. I served for 8 years, so I know how agendas go better than most.
And thank you for your service.
Yes, you bet. I'm with Pikes Peak Waterways, which is a nonprofit that has been formed to implement, working and collaborating with the city of Colorado Springs and Colorado Springs utilities to implement the COS Creek Plan. And we wanted to come and thank you for having us here today. We have 2 other members of Pikes Peak Waterways here with us. There's Dolly Wong Cass and Pam Shockley Zalabak, and we've all worked on the Pikes Peak Waterways, and we also were part of the team that worked on the COS Creek Plan. I think we've you may find this hard to believe, but we've watched Pueblo over the years work on the Arkansas River, and particularly your river walk. And I think Colorado Springs has watched with envy, to tell you the truth, of the work that you've been able to accomplish. So our work and beginning to work on Monument and Fountain Creeks through Colorado Springs is long overdue. And it's a project that these are multi-year projects. I don't know how long you've been working on the Arkansas River, but these are decade-long projects. But we're here tonight. We wanted to just come and share with you because we would rather you hear from us this exciting news rather than through the grapevine. So we've brought a couple of members. Annie Burlman is from Colorado Springs Utilities, and Chris Lieber is from NES Colorado, and they're here to just present to you tonight the exciting COS Creek Plan that we are hoping to begin work on in Colorado Springs. But one other thing I did want to mention is I want you all to know, because I sat in city council during some of the tumultuous years, that we're very aware of the agreements that we have with the city of Pueblo. And this plan in no way changes those agreements. As a matter of fact, we actually believe that some of the enhancements that will be made along the creek will actually benefit the people downstream from us. So I just wanted to state that fact too as we begin. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Lieber and Annie and let them present the plan to you tonight. So thanks.
Thank you, Jan. And again, my name is Chris Lieber. I'm with NES, and NES, we're land planners and landscape architects, and delighted to have an opportunity to work on this project and really support Pikes Peak waterways. And so I wanted to walk you through kind of a brief presentation. We're very excited about what this project means, not just for Colorado Springs, but also for the watershed really as a whole. And, you know, as we look across the country, but certainly along up and down Colorado and the Front Range, whether it's here in Pueblo and the tremendous work that you have done with your waterway, or we look up in Denver on the South Platte, or we go up to Fort Collins, all of those communities have done a tremendous job, I think, in really when it comes to placemaking, when it comes to looking at ways to improve water quality. And I think it's fair to say that Colorado Springs has not taken advantage of maybe some of those same opportunities. And so that's really what we see here tonight. So make sure I've got a 50-50 chance here. Perfect. So first of all, I wanted to mention that we had an opportunity to work with really an outstanding team, folks from across Colorado, but folks that have had experience across the United States. And as you look across kind of these photos here, the Greenway Foundation, they have been very instrumental in really transforming the South Platte and the areas along up in Denver, both from an environmental perspective, but from a kind of a cost benefit perspective. So Jeff Shoemaker and his team were absolutely instrumental. You see NES, and of course, I'm a principal there with NES, but our team, Wink and Associates, they literally, Bill Wink has literally written the book when it comes to working waterways. And so we were able to utilize their expertise. I think you may be familiar with them and some of their work they've done here. ECI, they're a contractor. You may wonder why a vision plan involve a contractor, but they know how to get these projects done and what it means to work in these waterways and to work in challenging projects. So they were helpful from a cost estimating standpoint. And then finally, capital representatives, they were helpful in helping us understand potential funding sources. So we have 4 primary goals, and we've enjoyed kind of leaning into these in really a full way. First of all, and most importantly, restoring the natural functions of the creek. I think as many of you may know, with both Monument and then Fountain Creek after Monument joins, back in the 30s and in the 60s, we had major flood events. And the response to that was largely, let's build a system that gets the floodwater out of Colorado Springs as quickly as possible. And that's the legacy, right? And maybe it was the right decision at that time. But if you look at how creeks are built and how they're designed today and those opportunities, it really is about so much more than that. It's about water quality. It's about flood attenuation. It's about all of those values, and as well as environmental. Another key piece to that, and I think of these as almost like layers to a cake. First, of course, and foremost is the naturally functioning creek, but next, outdoor recreation. What can we do to have the creek become a great place so where people feel safe, where they want to come down and enjoy the water's edge? The third goal is about really utilizing the creek as a place to protect some of the infrastructure investment that's already happened to date, but by smart planning, but also as an economic catalyst. If you look at Denver as a great example of this, the way that things like land values and have really been changed by these kinds of signature projects. So it's a chance for us to do that. And then finally, if we're going to do a project and do it successfully, what we've learned from other communities is you do it in your own way. In other words, you do it around placemaking, authentically, looking at your history, your community, and making something that's really the right fit. So you'll recognize on the right-hand side of this slide, that is the watershed. And I call it the turkey leg. It resembles kind of the shape of that turkey leg. But in this particular case, from a Colorado Springs perspective, obviously what we do in Colorado Springs finds its way down through the watershed. So it's about making those smart decisions. For us in Colorado Springs, we do have what I call kind of the symbolic heart of the watershed, and that's really where Monument and Fountain Creeks come together. So that's where we're proposing this kind of first start. So if you're familiar with that I-25 corridor as it runs through Colorado Springs, kind of at the top end of that, if you go past that Fontanero interchange, that's the north end of our Monument Park, Monument Valley Park. That would be the north end of this vision plan reach. It would continue on south, wrapping around downtown Colorado Springs to the South Nevada and South Tejon exit. So that's roughly the limits of the project. We also like to say that there aren't very many new ideas here because we've been talking about this for literally decades. And we identified 43 different plans, whether it be from our comprehensive plan to a number of technical documents that have all taken pieces of this. And what we think is exciting about this vision plan, it's the first time that all of this now is kind of finding its way into one place and one kind of dynamic vision. So we're building on that. As you may certainly know, Monument and Fountain Creeks had a lot of sinuosity and oxbows once upon a time. And the response largely from flood events was, let's put it in a channel and let's straighten that creek. Well, that has a number of impacts, right? It sends that water a little more quickly, certainly downstream, but you also lose a lot of the environmental opportunities. So on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see over time, literally, how the creek has been straightened. And it's really pretty fascinating to see that. But we have a history with General Palmer as our community's founder that looked at Monument and Fountain Creek as being kind of the center and the focal point of the creeks. And we've gotten away from that over the last 150 years. This exhibit shows largely what we have today. We have the levees on both sides. We have this thin little ribbon of riparian habitat, the creek running down in that. But really what that does is it separates, whether it be park space, whether it be adjacent kind of tributaries or creeks that would enter into this. And again, it does one thing pretty well, and that's move that flood water. So one response could be, and this is that first level that we're talking about, really looking at bringing some sinuosity back into the creek, introducing opportunities for water quality, treating water as it comes off of our public streets, off that system, treating it before it then enters into the creek, and certainly opportunities for layering recreation into and onto those spaces. But you can see from an environmental standpoint, much richer quality. And then on top of that, there are opportunities to really engage and bring people down to the water's edge. And that's what this slide begins to show as just kind of a model, and also rethinking about how development along the creek could happen. In many cases, we have buildings, we have infrastructure that's completely turned its back to the creek. So how might we learn from some of the things that you all have done down here and do that in a smarter way. And this then again begins to show again kind of yet another layer where all of those four goals really kind of come together. So with that, we then took a look at 5 specific projects. Let me, I guess, begin by saying we could talk about from a water quality perspective, parts per million. We could talk about the water volume. We could talk about flood levels. But I think for our community, it kind of comes down to 3 important pieces. One is fish, and whether or not we have a healthy fish habitat in our creeks. And if we do, that says we've done a lot from a technical perspective, and we've done it well. Second would be birds, because that says a lot about that ecosystem and that habitat. And then finally, kids. If you're a parent, if you're a child caregiver or grandparent, are you comfortable bringing your kids down by the water and to spend time? And if the answer to that is yes, then we've addressed things like water quality. We have a safe environment. We have an inviting sort of space. So I'm going to start at the top and just kind of work quickly through five projects that we think are absolutely kind of game changers for our community. This is at that Fontanero interchange. And today we have this thin little ribbon of the creek, and you can see that we've really expanded that here and are looking at significant environmental enhancements, significant water quality opportunities, but also then utilizing this as a catalyst for future development and future changes along the corridor. But imagine boardwalks, imagine again, a much healthier fish habitat, access for people, and a creek system that's still a workhorse, still works, but does so in a much more sensitive way. If you're familiar with Colorado College, this is that I-25 in Uinta, creating something that's a much bigger, better gateway for neighborhoods beyond the college, but connecting the college and providing a way for college students to be able to get down to the creek for the first time. Today, there's a 10-foot chain link fence that really separates the creek from the college. This is America the Beautiful, and this is where we have the confluence of Monument and Fountain Creeks. And it gives us a chance to, as a community, kind of celebrate that space. But also today, if you've been to America the Beautiful Park, there is a large berm and a levee that separates the park from the water. In fact, when you're there, you can't even tell that the creek exists. So this connects that, provides that way to access the creek. If we're going to do in-water recreation, this is the place to begin to introduce that. So we see that ultimately in the future. But all of this is underpinned by smart water quality, thinking smartly about things like drop structures in the creek, making sure that environment works and works well. You may be aware that the city of Colorado Springs is in the process of decommissioning the Drake Power Plant. And so this particular site is located adjacent to that. Now, this project is not about the decommissioning of the power plant in any way. It's about the creek that runs adjacent to it. But by the same token that we've largely turned our back to the creek through this corridor, we can make some changes here and think about adaptive reuse, but being smart about, again, fish habitat, thinking about things like water temperature that makes a big difference in our ecosystem. And then the fifth project, this is at Tejon, South Tejon and South Nevada, which is really a gateway to our downtown. In this particular location, when over 30 years ago, I remember being in this corridor and we had a thriving wetland at that location. What's happened is the creek has dropped in elevation. It's left that wetland basically high and dry. So a chance to kind of turn back the clock and reestablish those wetlands and really, again, do the right thing from an environmental standpoint, but also create this new gateway into the south part of Colorado Springs. I mentioned earlier that we're looking at an initial project, and that is at America the Beautiful Park. And that was kind of the third in the series of slides that I showed. It's a chance to build on the momentum that we have already. We have the new Olympic Museum located very close to there. So we've already invested a lot from a community perspective, build on that, but also celebrate our waterway and provide a signature project that kind of sets a tone, I think, for not just this project, but these ideas, these goals, these values, and some of the typologies travel well throughout the watershed. And what I mean by that is the city is already looking at another project, similar project on a section of Sand Creek, which of course flows eventually into Fountain and then comes down towards Pueblo. But these ideas, again, we hope can build momentum and so we can do the right thing in a variety of places across the watershed really over time. So that's a quick overview. There's a lot there. It's a project we're really excited about, and we think, again, has benefit, not just obviously direct benefit to Colorado Springs, but to the region overall. And so thank you. At this point, I think we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Or
Great. Thanks, Mr. Lieber, and thanks, Ms. Berleman, for that presentation. And Ms. Martin as well. Thanks for joining us. What questions are there from council? Councilor Flores.
Yeah, one of the questions, I've been involved in the Fountain Creek issue for, I don't know, since I was in high school during the 1965 flood. But, one of the things that Pueblo is always concerned about is obviously another flood that could occur because we still, our protection in Pueblo is only 100-year flood that was done due to a levee system that was constructed. But the question is, if all of these 5 projects were to come to fruition, is there any consideration as you're doing the planning of minimizing the amount of water that could land up in Pueblo? Obviously, especially through the fountain. I didn't realize, that I don't know whether or not they're comparable, the water that comes down Fountain Creek or Monument. I just don't know the engineering on those two. But it seems to me that there's a lot of potential for maybe mitigating the amount of water that would come in let's say it's a 500-year event. It could be pretty devastating to Pueblo, but it doesn't sound like what you're planning here would affect us in any way and maybe minimize the amount of water that's coming down the creek. Any comment on that?
If I can, I'll take kind of a high level and then so overall, what we're looking at doing is providing really more, broadening the floodplain, providing more space, more capacity for that. So when we do get those, I call them spikes, right? A lot of water at one time, we're able to handle that and have a greater capacity. So where possible, yes, that's part of this plan. At the same time, I know we also have a legal responsibility to eventually to pass that water on down to other water rights and water right users. So that's a high level response. And Annie, do you want to maybe build on that?
Yeah, and that is the biggest challenge with Fountain Creek is it's very flashy, right? It can go from dry and pretty quiet to just huge spikes. So with these projects, also, we look at these very beautiful pictures and they're fantastic, but underneath and the backbone and the foundation is stormwater projects and utilities projects. We need to protect our utilities and we need to have functional stormwater. So the goal with these projects is to tie all of those together. And when a big rain event comes, instead of having a peak, a very sharp peak like this, come up and send all of that water very quickly down, it's the same amount of water that comes off the watershed, but instead of being in a peak, we kind of flatten it out and spread it out over a longer period of time, which reduces the volume at any given time, but the overall discharge off of the watershed is the same. And so that's what these projects are trying to do with, you can see here, there's terraces where if the creek were to rise up, it can access different terraces, but when the flood event is over, it can return back to its channel and go on down to downstream users.
My last question has to do with the water quality. Back, I'd say 20 years ago here in Pueblo, there was a large discussion about building a dam on the fountain and creating a recreational area. And it was determined that it wasn't feasible. And when you look at the water quality of the fountain, and I see all these pristine pictures of very clear water, I'm just curious as to the other mitigation that you're going to be doing to provide, children to be able to walk in off a sandy beach here. I'm looking at at one of your slides here, but we determined that a dam or some sort of a pool like we have in Lake Pueblo was not feasible here, and maybe that's changed. But I'm curious as to how your studies have indicated that we could create not only all this recreation and beautification, almost a park-like look, but also be assured that we're going to have very pristine water coming down. You want to tackle that one?
No, these are
You're kind.
Yes. I will keep my discussion on water quality to an hour. No, I'm kidding. So water quality is a mixed bag on Fountain Creek, and actually water quality is my specialty. It's what I was hired to do with the utilities. And so there's some water quality issues that are beneficial, or some that are harmful to humans, and there's some that are harmful to like fish. So there's a selenium issue, and it doesn't happen upstream so much, but the cumulative effect by the time it gets to Pueblo and then down, and that's a victim of geology, by the time you get down to this area and to the Arkansas, there's a selenium impairment. So these kind of things, so that's harmful for a fish habitat, and we want to have a nice fish habitat. So capping exposed bedrock and taking our incised creek that's running on bedrock and pulling minerals out and rehabbing it and restoring it will help reduce those kind of water quality issues. For children, for humans specifically, our impairment is E. coli, and we are impaired for E. coli. We did, AFCURE did a study with E. coli looking at when is E. coli levels high and when are they low? And they're very high in these areas during high flow periods, like flushing events. Okay, E. coli is not naturally reproducing in the stream, it's being flushed in from the environment. So you need to take care of the environment around the creek, first of all, and then during high flows, you don't want to be in the creek, either for flow safety or for E. coli safety. So we're looking at ways where we can have, when is it safe to recreate at base flows and low flows? It actually, E. coli is not an issue because it's not being washed into the waterway. And so we are looking at different strategies on how we can mitigate and manage, something like E. coli, but then also with the restoration part, if we have a functioning waterway and a functioning ecosystem, it helps attenuate some of those other water quality parameters like selenium that are an issue. So one of these projects isn't going to really move the needle much. It's going to take all the projects, even more projects, and then taking care of the neighborhood around it. And then there's organizations like the Fountain Creek District that has done work, in between Colorado Springs and Pueblo, and those projects help as well. So these Colorado Springs projects will also help improve what the district has done and other organizations have done on the creek. So we're looking for a cumulative effect here, not a silver bullet. It'll be cumulative.
If you had all 5 of them completed, are you saying that it would reduce the selenium?
I hypothesize that it would. We have the data collection to measure that, but without actually doing the projects and actually doing the geotech studies, it's a hypothesis at this point.
And because this is a big deal for our city.
It is.
You
You guys have,
we have to mitigate the selenium that goes into our, when we divert back into the Arkansas River. It is a big expense that the city bears just because it's the EPA has dictated that. And so, I mean, that's, I bring that up because that is a positive.
it is a positive, yeah.
I'm-
How much, I couldn't even begin to tell you what kind of a reduction we could expect from that. We are doing some studies and looking at sediment reduction. If we reduce sediment, if we cap some of this bedrock issues, that it'll just not allow as much of that pollutants and contaminants to enter the waterway in the first place. So that would be interesting to
thank you.
see.
Thank you for being here this evening. Great.
Councilman Atencio.
Yeah, nice to see you, Annie. Haven't
It's good to
seen you
see
in a long
we
time.
haven't seen each other in 3D in like 2 or 3 years now. I
At
know.
least. I've been on the Fountain Creek District Board of Directors since its inception, 2008 or 2009, about then. And we've been working together for a really long time. Actually, the dam was feasible. The decision was made to do projects like this to mitigate the stream. Rather, it was going to cost $700-800 million to build a dam. It's going to cost $700 or $800 million to mitigate, to do projects like this on the stream to mitigate the same issues. Correct?
Correct.
So the decision was made to do projects like this up and down the creek. Make sure you do this presentation to the board at the Fountain Creek District.
Yeah.
These
That
are
was-
really
was
great.
given- It was given, was it
Yeah,
2
because
months ago, 3 months ago?
yeah, it was projects just like this, because when you have a stream that's going straight, like you said, the water is going to flow down there at 100 miles an hour. If you put bends in the river, just like these projects are going to do, you're going to slow down the water and mitigate a lot of the sedimentation, everything that happens, water quality, everything that has to do with it, and things like that. I proposed, as a matter of fact, great minds think alike. I proposed landings like this to the Fountain Creek District. We're going to ask for grants and look to see if we can get some money together to do a few of these up and down the creek. One at El Centro de Quinto Sol, one that looks just like this, I hope. Not to mention, they also mentioned a few other spots, Fountain, also between Pueblo and Colorado Springs. My biggest question is, have you looked at what it's going to do between your last project and Pueblo? What's going to happen to the creek because of these projects? I assume because the water quality is going to be better, the stream is going to flow slower out of Colorado Springs. It'll be a benefit, but have you done a real in-depth study? Because
We have-
what's
we have not
happening
done a-
between,
we've done a feasibility on quite what that will look like yet. We've done some preliminary studies and we've seen some improvements in our water quality through the stormwater improvements that Colorado Springs has made. And so we're starting to see the cumulative effects stack up, but it's in the preliminary stages. And
Yeah.
we hope to actually, when we get that study completed this year, present it to the district and maybe even, folks such as yourself in Pueblo County as well.
Yeah.
And that's where we say it's a cumulative effect.
and in terms of the water that, let's say these last few rainstorms that we've had up in Colorado Springs and Pueblo, I would say, I'm not a hydrologist, I don't know a whole lot about it, but I'll bet you that at least a 30 or 40 year event,
At least.
easy, if not 50-year event. I'm just throwing numbers out, but give you an idea, if this was a 40-year event, what a 100-year event would look like, probably double what we saw the water come down the fountain. I drove by the confluence the other day, and the water coming down the fountain was just as wide as the water coming down the Arkansas. It was unbelievable. It was really something, but we're going to still get the same amount of water. We just have to control it a lot better.
We just, yeah, it's just spreading it out just a
Spreading it
little
out.
bit, so it doesn't all come down in one big gush. Those flushing flows is what takes out infrastructure and bridges and that kind of stuff. That's what took out Highway 47.
Almost.
Almost
Yeah,
took it out. Yeah. It just,
almost. Yeah. Okay. That's all. Thank you.
thank you.
Councilwoman Winter.
Hey, thanks for that presentation. So the Fountain Creek Watershed District was formed out of a lawsuit from Pueblo County to Colorado Springs because they were not maintaining their stormwater. Pueblo County has an agreement with in the Southern Colorado delivery system for Colorado Springs to maintain the tamarisk and dredging of the fountain in the Pueblo area. So I know when this first started, the fountain looked really nice. They took out all that tamarisk, and I think there was some widening and also some dredging, and I haven't seen anything since. So I'm not Pueblo County, but it seems to me you're out of compliance, or the Fountain Creek District is out of compliance with this Colorado Southern Delivery System.
So I'm just gonna close the loop on that. So yeah, Southern Delivery System, and what you're referring to is our 1041 permit. And the commitment to $50 million paid from Colorado Springs to the district to remediate potential issues from Southern Delivery System. And as part of that agreement, the initial part of the agreement was to do tamarisk control and a dredge operation, but it was a one-time deal. There wasn't an agreement to dredge every 5 years or 10 years or anything else like that. That was part of the initial agreement for the monetary mitigation funds and the $50 million. From there, after that initial effort was done, the $50 million held by the district was to step in and do creek restoration projects, bank stabilization, and sediment removal.
I know there's been some restoration projects up in Green Mountain Falls. I think a lot of money went up there, and all those homes are like $2 million
Are you familiar?
and up.
I
I mean, that was a huge project, and still the east side's getting flooded out.
Green.
in Green Mountain Falls.
Green Mountain Falls.
I'm not aware of that. I know there was a lot of work done in Manitou,
Mhm.
really in the aftermath of 2015, of the aftermath of the Waldo Canyon fire. I'm aware of that, but I guess I'm not specifically aware of the Green Mountain Falls, but we could do some research and check.
All right, thanks.
I just wanted to add that, and Larry, you can help with this, that the Fountain Creek Watershed District was not formed as a result of the lawsuit. It was formed as a result of the 1041 permit agreement with the city of Pueblo and Colorado Springs. So it was created with constituents and elected officials from the Fountain Creek Watershed, the whole area, all coming together to work on the creek, but it was not part of the original lawsuit. And I just wanted to clarify that. Because the district itself has done some great work, and they received this $50 million from utilities at the time. And that was part of our 1041 permit in the agreement with the city of Pueblo. And they've done some great work too to help with water flows through Fountain Creek. But I know, as a former council member, and our council serves as the board of directors for our utility company, and which I served on, I know how closely our utilities works to maintain this agreement. I mean, they monitor it daily. That's part of what Annie does. They monitor it all the time to be certain we remain in compliance with that agreement. So just wanted to clarify.
Because I didn't read anything in the agreement that said it was a one-time deal. Public County is definitely
From the-
specified in there.
Which agreement, because in the 1040,
I've got the 1041 agreement.
the 1041 does not address the dredging and the tamarisk.
Does.
It was just,
No, that was just one of the projects.
one of the, that was just
Yeah.
one of the projects. And
Yeah.
and one of it was a pilot project, right? There was a levee system and a dredge that was actually a pilot project to see what sedimentation would do.
Yeah.
It was pilot.
Well, for the city of Pueblo, that dredging project was $6 million. The 13th Street restoration was $6 million, and the Highway 47 restoration project was $6 million. So that was $18 million just in the city of Pueblo that the Fountain Creek District.
And Eagle Ridge is queued up and.
Eagle Ridge is.
So in other words, Pueblo is not maintaining it then. Pueblo County's not
The
maintaining.
biggest problem that we have right now is the district does a project and then there's nobody to maintain it after that. What
Right,
we've
so-
got to do,
So we're not maintaining it
it's not being maintained.
at all.
That dredging project.
I mean, it's obviously not. being maintained.
Sedimentation filled it up again. It was money down the drain.
Yep, It
But it was a project that the county insisted on, the city insisted on it.
Well, if you're not
so
going to
that-
maintain it, is money down the drain. You're not going to maintain
Yeah.
it.
Well, the problem is that the Fountain Creek District only has less than about $20 million left. And after that's gone, the district is going to be gone and the Fountain Creek is going to do whatever it's going to do, thanks to your projects in Colorado Springs. But from Colorado Springs to Pueblo, it's just going to go.
That's too bad.
Well, the district is actually right now, we have a collaborative agreement with the city and utilities. And so Pikes Peak Waterways, that is, and we meet once a month. And next week, Fountain Creek Watershed District is actually coming to present to us because we see this as a partnership. We're
Yeah.
not trying to take work away from them. We want this to be a win-win for everybody.
Mhm.
But the Fountain Creek Watershed District is actually in the process of doing a new strategic plan and are considering as a watershed district, they have authority through the state to actually propose a mill levy to the voters. They would have to be approved by the voters. And they are considering that at this time. I know, so fingers crossed, but that is what would give Fountain Creek
Yeah.
Watershed District the funding they need to move forward.
The problem there is that the northern part of the watershed doesn't see the problems in the bottom part of the watershed and all the problems at the bottom part of the watershed. So to get a voter, I don't want to say Colorado Springs or El Paso County, to vote for a new mill levy or an increase in their taxes.
In a,
It's
in a, in
real-
a, in a impoverished area.
Yeah. it's,
Right.
Well,
So
that's
it's going to be tough.
actually think our project can help with that because our project is in El Paso County and it is in the city of Colorado Springs. And we
True.
really believe
True.
if you can kind of capture the hearts and minds of the public and what the possibilities
Yeah.
are that we
I can see that.
help to pass sort of the mill levy for the Fountain Creek Watershed District.
Yeah.
We're looking to partner with them in any way we can.
Yeah.
You have a time frame for these projects?
Yes, we could tell you a time frame and then it'll change. These are very long projects. And we don't anticipate our earliest timeline that we had set out, we wouldn't even begin construction until 2026 at the very earliest. And the way permitting goes and funding, there are ways out, but you have to start today if you want to eventually get there tomorrow. So
How long have you been working on the Arkansas? You've done projects like your River Walk. How long did it take? It was
80s?
in the 80s.
80s,
So that's about right. Denver's been working on the plat for 40 years.
40 years.
Yeah, I'll be dead by then.
Yeah.
Yep, got to start today if we're going to get it done tomorrow.
Great. So I guess we'll see you in 2026 for the construction,
Construction
for groundbreaking.
Before and then the
That's
after.
groundbreaking.
Yeah.
Be sure to invite you. We can't thank you enough for giving us some time tonight to just share this with you. It's an exciting project. Any questions you have, you can always reach out. We'll give these to council. And we're glad to answer any questions or anything going forward.
I guess, Miss Martin, do you need let me back up. Do you need any help from the city or how can Pueblo help you?
At this point, you can always be ambassadors for us, is because we do believe this project will help Pueblo. in the long run. It'll be in addition to what the agreements we already have. And, you know, what happens upstream, if we slow it down and clean it up as it comes down, that can only help Pueblo. So, you know, if you'll just be ambassadors, or if any questions come up, you know, work with us. We want to partner. We understand that there's no one entity or organization who can create this. This takes a little bit from everybody. And so we want to partner with you as well as with Fountain Creek Watershed District and everybody along.
Well, seeing no other questions, then thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
I want to just say that Counselor Winter, you said money down the drain. That was a pun.
Yeah,
Oh, you meant it? Oh,
you know, it all runs downstream.
and well, I thought it was very funny. All right, Mr. Broadhead.
Well, the snow runs downstream as well.
And Mr. Hobson, I see. Great. Thanks for joining us.
I planned on being brief, but I'll be extra brief now in light of the
Thanks,
time.
Wade.
Yeah. And then this is a clicker, or do you? All right. All right, so I will try to be brief. And so the first slide is just to talk about the purpose of the HPC. This is from the ordinance, and I just put this on here just to show you that although number one is to identify and create landmarks in historic districts, the city was pretty forward thinking and putting lots of different categories in there, including economic development, neighborhood, stabilizing property values, as well as economic development and tourism. So when we approved, or the HPC approved, the Neon Alley quite a long time ago, that was a little bit controversial, but we fell back on the intent of the ordinance was to promote economic development and tourism. So the board details, we have 7 members appointed by the mayor. The big thing I wanted to show here is that 40% have to have backgrounds in historic preservation, law, real estate, construction, something, so that people who are reviewing what you're about to do to your historic building aren't just coming from nowhere, that they've actually got some background in historic preservation. We are audited by the state, by History Colorado. We are eligible for CLG grants, for these little grants that have no match. And so to do that, we have to maintain 40% professional people on the board. And just a real quick slide to show you that Pueblo's got about 40,000 buildings, only about 220 of them are landmarked. And so a very small percentage of buildings are landmarked in city. And I think that in comparison, Denver's got like 7,000 landmarks and 4% of their city. So we don't even have 1% of our city landmarked. And a lot of it's actually 1950s and 60s stuff that people don't want to hear as historic sometimes. And the jurisdiction, this is good just to see where your landmarks are. Of course, Union Avenue is the lion's share of the historic buildings. The north side, phase 1 and phase 2 that were done in the early 2000s, as well as a smattering of historic landmarks that came in 2005 in Mesa Junction. And the duties, I'm going to go over these slide by slide, but they did give the flexibility to look at and review cases, to do local landmarks, as well as to do any kind of special projects, surveys, and outreach in the ordinance. And here's really the big one, is the biggest thing you should take away from this is that the Preservation Commission allows your citizens tools, economic tools, and that's to locally landmark their property. If they locally landmark their property and they want to do a small rehab, there's a state tax credit that goes towards your state tax liability. So you have to have a little bit of tax liability to have this make sense, but it also helps nonprofits. So if, say, Posada were to buy a historic building and want to renovate that for some purpose, you guys making a local landmark would make them eligible for a state historic grant. So you will see one of the first one of these next month, or in August. There's somebody who's going to fix up a house in the historic North Side district, and they're going to bring in another house, and then they're going to use the state tax credit to put, over $50,000 of investment into the properties. We haven't seen a lot of those because you have to have a tax liability. So if you're kind of middle, lower incomes, this doesn't really help, but we're starting to see some of this. Denver does this all the time. And yeah, that was the other thing I just wanted to reiterate, is that it's really you guys creating historic landmarks, and that those people can go out and use those as economic tools to get money from grants as well as tax credits. And commercial businesses can use this as well. Generally, to get the grants, you have to be a nonprofit, like the city can go after it, or a nonprofit, not just a business. But businesses, if they're on the national register, they can use a historic tax credit. And so the Fuel and Iron, the really successful project recently, they use historic tax credits, and the Keating School that is going through the process is going to be using a really large historic tax credit. So we try to be here, if even though we don't do the National Register tax credit or nominations, people quite often come to us as a first stop. There's a ton of developers, I'm surprised, that don't know about assets they can use to fix up older buildings. So we're almost like an extension of the state or the federal preservation staff. And then our primary task, we review alterations when you created the districts that I'll talk about in a second. The changes get reviewed under a set of guidelines. One on the left here is a solar panel array. We've done a number of these on Grand Avenue. I think every single one of them has been approved. And then we do certificates of compliance in the historic business district if it's a non-contributing building. And so those are the Lambkin lofts. And even though they are historic and look historic, they were never added to a registry. So they go through a little bit different process. And the historic business zone district. So Pueblo is one of the first places in Colorado to have historic preservation formalized like this. 1984, thanks to Jim Munch and a number of other people, they worked really hard to create the historic business zone district. And so that was a zoning effort. It actually wasn't a traditional historic district like we have now. And so it was all controlled by a review board. And I think really the purpose of that was to protect the investment in the 1980s and 90s. I wasn't here, but I've looked at pictures of Union Avenue in the 1980s, and it was not, some parts of it were not in great shape. So I think they wanted, people who were going to invest $1 million in a historic storefront wanted to make sure the person next to them wasn't going to put up a cinder block, tire changing place. So that was really the intent of where the historic business came from. And then 1980s, they used the zone district and they applied it over the Union Avenue Historic District. And so we have two different things. We have a zone district as well as a National Register district. And so the historic business zone district was to fill in the teeth in between it so that somebody wouldn't fix up a historic building and somebody right next to them would put something that was really incompatible. And then 2002 is when kind of the current state of affairs started. A number of citizen advocates and council people worked pretty hard to get a preservation ordinance, and this is citywide. So up until 1984, there was really just the ability to do historic preservation in Union Avenue. And so this became citywide. We created a preservation commission, all the rules for approvals, the ability to locally landmark things all came in. And then it took a couple of years to get standards for that. And then I want to stop on this one. We do HPC training. The National Alliance of Preservation Commissions did a training last year. I did a training this year that I taped so that I can give it to new commissioners. And so we teach them, to stick to the standards, just like all the other boards, even if you don't like it, don't say things like this is ugly, it doesn't meet the standard. So if you don't like it, use the terms of the ordinance. So I think the only issue is really we've cycled through quite a few people recently. And so we're going to work with the mayor's office to be a little bit more aggressive in bringing people in who've got backgrounds in fixing up historic buildings. And then that section 106, I had a couple of places in there, and it's that kind of federal alphabet soup. And so we also comment on any kind of undertakings by a state or federal agency where there's federal money. So I use this picture here of a huge cell tower that was supposed to go in Corona Park area, and it was a potentially eligible historic area. So we commented on it. If CDOT's going to take out, part of Mineral Palace Park or something like that, the Preservation Commission can give feedback to the agency from the historical agents. So we're doing these most of the time. They try to avoid any type of contact, and it really doesn't come up very much. Upcoming projects is Hispanic context study. We're really proud that we did study the whole city, kind of at high level of north side, south side, Bessemer. We did the whole city, and really kind of the Hispanic experience in Pueblo needs to be documented. We've been working with Charlene Sims and Deb Espinoza. We want to do a citywide context study and then have that study have a plan and kind of next steps after that. And part of that would be identifying local landmarks that are important to the Hispanic community in Pueblo. Those could landmark, and those could then get grants or use tax credits to get fixed up, as well as kind of fixing some of the code issues we have. And as you directed us last time to look at murals in the Union Avenue and Historic District. And I think that's it. So hopefully that was brief.
Good job.
Any
Lee.
questions? What?
Questions for Mr. Broadhead? Mr. Hobson, did you have anything to add?
We'll just be here to answer questions.
Any questions? Counselor Winter?
Scott, I thought you were going to fall asleep there for a second. Did they change any of the tax credits to make them more attractive? I know, say if you've got $50,000 in tax credits, Prior, you could only write off or use those tax credits, say like $1,000 or $2,000 a year. So it wasn't really worth your time to go through that if you planned on,
Like a home renovation?
yeah, any kind of tax credit.
I was
So say if
thinking,
you've got a $50,000 tax credit, they
Yeah.
only let you write off or use that tax credit like $1,000 a year or
Well,
$2,000 a year. So
Okay.
for most folks, that's not really feasible
yeah.
because they're not going to hold on to the property that long.
So I can check. I did know that you can carry it back a year and push it out 10 years, but I didn't know about the limits per year. So I
Yeah,
can
if you
check
could
into that.
let me know about that.
Yeah,
I
and that's
think
why
that
you
was-
haven't seen a lot of people using it because it's not super, it's
It's
better
just not
than
feasible. It's
nothing.
just not
Yeah.
feasible.
Yeah,
So-
and it does take some paper.
And then you're under all these conditions.
Yeah,
So let me know what,
Okay.
if they've did any changes on that.
okay, I
'Cause
should,
Right now, it's just not attractive.
yeah, I should be able to find out by tomorrow.
Other questions? Wade, do we have a current map of all of the landmarks that we have marked as historic in the city limits?
Yeah, where'd it go? That one on the right, I mean, so both of these, the one on the left, I don't know if we published any place, but the one on the right is from the master plan.
Okay.
So the master plan consultant actually was really good and they got a number of items in the master plan talking about preservation. So we superimposed, even though the dots are smaller, they're all on there, as well as the green areas are like potentially all the areas that we studied. And so if
Mhm.
investors actually have called and said, hey, I've got a property in this potential area, could it be historic? So the green area is just like, hey, you could potentially be eligible. You should give us a call and we'll discuss.
So you don't have to be in the historic business district to apply for historic landmark status.
No, anybody who's over 50 years is eligible. And then you have to have significance and integrity. And at the local level, we can be pretty flexible with that. So
And-
somebody important-ish in the house, and then some type of, you need to portray the period that, so if you're 1920s, you couldn't have totally stuccoed over everything or,
Right.
bricked over everything.
Do you know off the top of your head if the Coronado Motel is?
It is, yeah, it got
Landmark.
listed in the National Register. Yeah, I think the mayor just asked me about that. So
Oh, really?
it's on the National Register, which is the best one. So a business person could use tax credits to fix that one. And that one is generally pretty lucrative, but you generally have to spend a decent amount of money to make it worthwhile.
Okay, we were just talking about that, so
Yeah.
small
Yeah.
world.
So call me anytime. I can help with that.
Great.
If I can, I can get you to, who can.
Okay, seeing no other questions then for Mr. Hobson or Mr. Broadhead, I appreciate you both sticking around for that presentation. Thanks.
Thanks.
All right, next on our agenda is an executive session, so I will now take a motion to adjourn into executive session.
I move to go into executive session for the purpose of determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and or instructing negotiators under CRS section 24-6-402, prin 4, prin E. And the following additional details are provided for identification purposes. ARPA agreement, nonprofit lead center. No adoption of any proposed policy, position, resolution, rule, regulation, or formal action shall occur at any executive session that is not open to the public. All council members are reminded that it is a violation of the code of ethics for a council member to disclose the records or discussions in executive session.
Second.
So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? So we will adjourn into executive session. We're gonna be in this United Way, we're gonna be in this conference room right here.
They're like tree bugs.
Oh.
Pretty awesome.
I'm not the only one?
Tree bugs, yeah.
As far as I can tell, Zoo wants to. No, I don't think it's, I don't think it's. That's fine. It just kind of the only difference is the NBC in this room except for. Yeah, unfortunately, anyone on Zoom, really not people that and I'll just go back. It would be a weird. Audio's a different thing. But no, working to our CVP is completely isolated. So,
Well, thank you again. Sorry, I didn't mean to, apologize.
Oh, you're fine. I just came to see if I could try to help fix it. If I wasn't able to.
Yeah, and I think that's what happened.
Okay, I can always see it.
Well, thank you again.
See you later. No, I can do. Yeah.
Yeah, I just like to, I just have priorities and I think everybody else does too. So I just want to make sure that it's all, I just don't understand.
The time is now 7:48 PM and the executive session has concluded. The participants in the executive session were
Larry Atencio.
Heather Graham, Bob Jagger, Vicente Martinez Ortega, Nicholas Gratifar, Laura Solano, Lori Wood, Regina Maestri, Shannon Farmer, Reed Weber, Heather Graham.
What's his name?
And then just for the record, the participants from the United Way presented information, then left the meeting while instruction and negotiations.
For the record, if any person participated in the executive session who believes that any substantial discussion of any matter not included in the motion go into the executive session occurred during the executive session, or that any improper action occurred during the executive session in violation of the open meetings law, I would ask that you state your concern for the record. Seeing none, I conclude this work session at 7:49.
Oh, my God, right?